Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason, a guy who has never had the pleasure of using a safe use site.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And I say the pleasure. I'm sure that's a little snarky, but you know, it would have been nice if there was a nice, comfortable place to go where I knew I wouldn't die.
Yeah, and for me, I never was homeless during my active addiction, so it was never a problem. I always had a safe place to use, or, you know, as safe as you can use anywhere.
Right. Yeah, see, I stayed in like a boarding house for a very short time, and they wanted half my stuff. So I was like, nope, homeless it is. I'm not giving half my stuff away. That's crazy. So yeah, we're going to talk about New York City and their supervised drug injection sites, or safe consumption sites, or overdose prevention sites, or whatever in the world you would like to call them at this point. They seem to go by a variety of names, but we do have some, I guess we call it housekeeping items to go over first. We've gotten some really, really nice messages from people lately, and just wanted to acknowledge some of that. Emily reached out to us on Instagram and was just telling us that she thinks the podcast's great. She's gotten a lot out of it when she's been struggling. It sort of feels like conversations that happen in informal fellowshipping, she said, which I think that's kind of what we're going for here.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope they also help when you're not struggling. It's not like, I'll just listen when life sucks. Listen when life is good too. Maybe it'll keep that going. But no, it was really kind. And anytime we get feedback like that, it just, I don't know. I don't think I would stop if nobody gave us feedback, because I enjoy it and I feel like there's personal growth in this, but it's still reaffirming.
Yeah, it's definitely encouraging, especially since we don't seek, whatever you call it, praise or approval or surveys or any of that stuff. So people are actually going out of their way to send us that feedback. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, maybe I should start fishing for a little more feedback there. It kind of does feel good. We also had another message, or actually this was a comment on our Instagram. Miss Erin said she just wanted to tell you how much, let me just read it and not try to change the words. Just wanted to tell you how much I love your podcast. It's really open-minded and funny and honest. Going to do a deep dive into the catalog today. #fan for life with like 5 hearts.
Oh,
like,
nice.
Oh,
that's very nice.
I know, right? It's just, it's warming. We got a comment on YouTube from Skylar, who said it's a great podcast. And then we also got a message from, well, the name on Instagram is Mindset Expert, which is really interesting. And she left us a voice message just telling us she, works in the field. She's got some different opportunities that she partakes in to help people and give back. And she just told us she loves it. She loves that we keep a sense of humor about it, that we're talking about things, we're, exposing people to new ideas. And just thank you. I mean, all of these people reaching out, it means a ton to all of us. And by all of us, I mostly mean me and Billy, but also Jenny, who's a regular here, and Caroline. I'm sure they appreciate it too. Like, their contributions are not looked over. Speaking of contributions, we always like to acknowledge anyone who has given us any cash to assist. We don't, there's some podcasts where it costs money to listen to them and stuff, and that's not something we've ever wanted to do. We want to be free and accessible. That being said, of course, there's always costs involved in running a podcast. And Billy and I always like to say we don't keep any money for ourselves that gets donated to us. We pass it along to the recovery community to be of benefit in some kind of way, shape, or form. And so we want to acknowledge people who have contributed. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And I guess, something I've never mentioned before, but I kind of heard this somewhere else. If you listen to our podcast And you listen in and you get this hour's worth of like a relieving feeling or a positive vibe or something. Like, just think about, did this hour make me feel as good as a cup of coffee does in the morning, right? And if you want to donate the price of a cup of coffee per month to us, you want to buy us a cup of coffee, you can go right to the website, recoverysortof.com. There's a PayPal button somewhere on there, and there's, I think, even a donate tab to make it easier to find if you don't want to scroll around and look. And you can just donate the price of a cup of coffee. And again, we're not even going to drink it. We're going to buy somebody in recovery
Right.
or you know, someone trying to find recovery. We're going to buy them a cup of coffee with it, or a pair of shoes, or an outfit to get a job interview, or whatever the hell it is that they need is the goal. And thank you to Voices for giving us that opportunity and that easy means of interacting with the community. You know, Voices of Hope is a nonprofit we're slightly associated with that, you know, gives us that opportunity because they're in the mix and helping people out on the ground level. And, you know, we can just pass that money right to them and they do useful and helpful things with it. So thank you to everyone. We appreciate all your donations, contributions, your feedback. Like, all of it feels nice. And the great thing about, I think, having that way of operating where we're not charging for the podcast is if people who don't have the money to buy us a cup of coffee, that's cool. We still want you to listen and get the information and enjoy.
Yeah, and for me, this all came about just from you and I having a lot of conversations about recovery and the amount that I felt like I was growing and getting out of some of those conversations, and the idea of like, hey, let's talk about some of this stuff and think through some of these ideas and explore recovery stuff that you're not going to necessarily hear in an hour meeting or whatever. And I've enjoyed it. I know it's helped me a lot too.
Yeah, and same for me. I mean, I thought this podcast was a great idea because when I heard myself talking aloud to you, I was like, that's brilliant. It should be on a podcast. No, I'm just
kidding. We are really smart.
All right. So we wanted to get into safe consumption sites. That just sounds, every time I hear consumption, I think of like a 1989 Hallmark movie where somebody coughs blood into a handkerchief. They got the consumption.
Yeah, and one of the things I believe the name keeps changing because it's still, definitely in the United States, it's a newer idea, at least newer being put into practice. And it is sort of developing and changing kind of on the fly, you know. Obviously, if you call it a safe injection site, that makes it sound like it's just for people that are shooting drugs,
right,
you know, and it's not necessarily what they are.
Which was fascinating when we found that out.
Yeah.
You don't have to do heroin or anything by needle to go there.
Yeah.
I guess could you go snort heroin there?
I don't know.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's there for. You can smoke crack there.
You can get your drugs tested there.
Can you?
Yeah. So that's one of the other things.
Man, now I'm really jealous.
Yeah.
I could have knew if I got burnt or not before I shot the coffee creamer.
Well, I don't know that they test the purity. I think they just test for fentanyl. So.
Oh. Well, they should like really test it and
need
tell
an
me
analysis.
Is this legit?
If you want to use it, how long are you going to wait for your analysis to come back?
I'm hoping it's immediate.
Right.
Rapid result test.
Yeah, I need a rapid test of my purity.
Of course, then I'd be pissed. I'd be like, I bet some of the heroin got sucked up in order for you to test it. That was the part I needed.
How much of that did you have to use for the test?
How much are you cutting off the top of my pill there? Are you really using all that to test?
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's fascinating. So I think in general, like where do you start with this conversation? Just the idea that who would have thought we'd have this? Like, it's still federally illegal. Apparently there's some crack house law, which isn't called that specifically, but that's how it's referred to, that like you can't create an establishment with the purpose of allowing people to do illegal drugs there.
Yeah. So safe injection sites or safe use sites have existed in other countries. I think there's like 20 other countries that actively have them. I know Canada, there's a couple in Canada. So it's not, like I say, it's not a new concept or something that other countries haven't been using. There is some data on their success and how well they've worked, and it's a little bit of controversy over who they really help and what they really do. But one of the things we know for sure, at least it seems like, is that they definitely save lives. I think you had brought up, and I had heard that statistic somewhere too, that no one has died in one of these safe use sites since they've been in existence, which is pretty fucking amazing. I mean,
that blows my mind.
Yeah, because we know, I mean, overdose death rates, I think they said they've like tripled in the last 20 years.
Mhm.
And then 2020 was the worst on record in the United States. So we know the overdose death rate is going through the roof. The tainted drug supply, if you want to call it that, illegal drug supply is rampant now. You're finding fentanyl and all kinds of drugs besides just heroin or what was thought to be heroin. It's in everything. Right. And people are overdosing at alarming rates. And to say that, we're allowing people to go into these sites and use freely and that no one has died is, I guess, I'll use the word amazing. I don't know if amazing is the right word, but it definitely means it's at least serving that purpose. We're keeping people alive.
So this article that I was looking at from the Gothamist, it says that 30 people per 100,000 residents of population in New York City overdosed and died. And I think I saw the number on a different article, which I couldn't find again, but it said it was 2,000 people or something like that. I haven't run the numbers. Feel free to go out and fact check me and correct me on that. But 2,000 people died. That's a lot of people. I mean,
for sure.
If we had like 2,000 listeners, I'm just saying that'd be fantastic. We might have 2,000 listeners. I don't know. But that's an incredible number. And the fact that no one, like that blew my mind when I read that. No one, not one single motherfucker has died in a safe use site. And I was like, really? I mean, people are only there getting high. Like nobody? Not one? Not once did they fuck it up? Like, that's incredible, amazing. Like, I don't know what words you want to put on that. Fantastic. Like, and to me that says, well, if everybody just used it as a safe use site, nobody would die anymore.
Yeah, and part of the problem, I guess, or one of the issues we run into is there's a certain type of person, I don't know how to say this nicely, there's a certain type of person or a certain mentality that believes that we shouldn't be saving people from the consequences of their behaviors. But when those behaviors are death, it seems like we should, and I don't know how you weigh that out. I don't want to say there's a specific line, but it seems like you fall on one side of the line or the other. And it's like, well, you do anything you can to save someone's life. That's always the thing you want to do. It doesn't matter if they did it to themselves or not. I mean, even if someone's trying to commit suicide, you don't just go, oh, well, they wanted to die, so you let them die. Like you help them. You try to get to a place where they're not dying. And unfortunately, like that, for me, and at least there is something to be said for the risk of death was something I thought about when I was using. It was something that was on my mind. Like, I could really die doing this shit. I think at that point in my life, I didn't really care, which was different, but that risk of death was definitely there.
I don't know. I still thought I was immune. Yeah. Kind of like how I feel about COVID now. Like, it can't touch me. I'm good.
Yeah.
It's interesting. In general, I mean, I do disagree on principle that just consequences make people adjust, but I get it. I get that there are consequences that can help us learn. Life is an experiment. We really don't know what the fuck we're doing. And so you have some consequences and you're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. I'll do something different next time. Not a terrible theory at its base, right?
And not to stop you there, but for me, that's part of my story a lot of times when I share it. Like, I'll say, I love using drugs. I love the feel that heroin gave me. I stopped using because of the consequences.
Yeah, I hear you say that on here. I'm always questioning that to some extent.
I'm curious. Only for myself. I'm like, I don't know. Is that really a thing?
Was that on the drug court episode he said that too? I think so. I
say it when I share in part of my personal story. I mean,
I guess for me, the question is why, right? I'm not doubting that you love getting high, but like, what is it about me that loved getting high? What was it that wasn't there that felt like the whatever the high gave me, or the release or the relief or the calmness? What was that providing, and why can't I find a different way to give it to myself, right? Like, it's not really the questioning that was it a useful tool for me? It's just, I don't know necessarily that means that I'm this guy that just loves getting high. I think this means that, oh, there was some stuff going on, and what's the message about that stuff that was going on, and how can I address that in maybe some ways that have different consequences.
Yeah, and I guess I just like the exploring alternate realities kind of thing. Like just being in completely different mental states. Like my goal was never like, I'm just going to use a little bit. Like I always wanted to get fucking obliterated to like, to get to some different mental plane or whatever. And I don't know. I agree that what I've found for myself now there are other ways to get there, and that one seems pretty dangerous, using, and the consequences seemed pretty high for the reward. Like the risk reward for me wasn't there anymore.
I feel like my different plane of existence in that aspect was like non-existence. That's where I was trying to get. I was trying to get to where I didn't even realize I was here anymore. Kind of. I mean, I was like a blackout drunk, and I wanted to use till I was nodding. I wanted to use till I was nodding to the point where I wasn't even aware I was high anymore, which is kind of pointless. Like you missed the whole supposed high. That's why I guess I questioned this "did I love getting high" thing, because I didn't want to stop there. It wasn't like, oh, I got a nice buzz now, I'll stop here. Like, no, I'm gonna keep going until there's nothing.
Yeah, I don't know if I did or not. I don't.
All right, bring us back. So yeah, the idea of consequences isn't necessarily terrible, and while I don't really particularly agree that we can just have enough consequences to change people completely, I get the general theory that people of that belief system come from, right? Like, hey, if you end up homeless, you will not like the conditions and you will change your life around, get a job. And okay, I don't believe it, but I understand that. But yeah, there's the line of like, at some point, when death is the actual consequence, nobody's learning or growing from that. Yeah. Like it becomes an invalid point then. Like, okay, you want to let the guy be homeless because he doesn't want to work? Fine. Let him be homeless and hopefully he doesn't die of starvation or freezing to death and gets his life together. But to let the only alternative to a safe use site or keeping people alive is, well, fuck them, let them die, basically. Right. And that just doesn't make sense.
And to me, that the idea of just fuck them, let them die is contrary to a big narrative in this country, which is the rise from the ashes, overcome the adversity, become, triumphant over your demons. Like that's a major narrative that gets played out throughout our society. And people love to hear those stories. You know what I mean? They love to hear the guy that was homeless in the streets, doing drugs and committing crime that has now changed his life and is running, a recovery center or doing whatever. Like people love that story. And I don't think they connect the two things. Like, well, if you don't keep people alive long enough to hopefully have that experience, you're cutting a lot of those stories out before people ever get the chance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like the guy who got it together or managed to find the help he needed or the support he needed was any fundamentally different than the guy who died. It just, he got the opportunity somehow. And maybe that's what we'll find, down the road from some of these people at the safe consumption sites is that, they have a story of success later and they're like, oh, thank God that place kept me alive long enough to get to this place.
Right. And sometimes, like for me, so I never had like an active overdose where I ended up in hospital or needing resuscitated or anything like that. Fucking completely dumb luck. You know what I mean? It wasn't ever anything that I did to prevent that. When I got heroin and did heroin, I never tested it for purity or knew how much. It was like, well, this is about how much I did the last time, so this is how much I'm going to do this time, and how do I feel? And, it just really, and of course they say fentanyl kind of changed that whole game, for overdoses. Fentanyl has been a huge contributor to the overdose deaths, and maybe that's what's propelled the need for stuff like this.
Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't. There was no safe using in my variety of using. It was like, hey, one pill did this. I wonder what 2 does. Right. Let's try 4. And what kept me alive probably more than anything was I was broke and didn't get a lot of money and got stuff that was really stomped on in the middle of the city. Like, that's probably what kept me alive. I couldn't get the good shit and didn't have enough money to get enough of it. And dumb luck, like you said.
And it's not like experienced users don't overdose. It's like it's just so dangerous nowadays. I mean, I don't know. It's a terrible, terrible consequence. I mean, and when I was using people, there was a few people that overdosed in the time, during my active use, but it wasn't like it is today.
Yeah. A friend who we were using with went out. I don't know. At this point, I really, looking back, don't know how serious it was, whatever. We ended up calling emergency services and they did whatever they do and she was fine. And then, going to use one time on the street behind a house, we ran into somebody else because apparently that was a popular using spot behind that house, who was, blue looking, but I believe she was alive after that emergency services encounter too. So, heard about people and all that, but it wasn't I didn't have a huge network when I was out there. It was like by myself and, it's just sad to hear people later on that have passed, but I don't know. I've never had the answers. I think one of the things that stood out to me, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring this topic in, and I think, Billy kind of came up with the topic, but it's been on my mind a little bit, is like right after this opened, I was on Instagram, I'm scrolling through, and somebody from the recovery community, and I'm not, going to put anybody on blast or anything, but they had posted, there's been 5 overdoses already at the new safe consumption site. We need to get rid of this shit. We need to not allow this crap in our neighborhoods. And looking through the comments, like there was a ton of comments, like people are passionate about this. And there was a few that, kind of go along with things that I think about it. But there was mostly in this 100 and some comments, people agreeing. People from our recovery community, like, this is bad for us. This is terrible. We shouldn't have this. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that the recovery community was so against this, right? Like, I don't know why it's a huge shock thinking about the way we've kind of rebelled against Suboxone and methadone and all those, medicated assisted treatments. But like, it was shocking to me. I was like, God, everybody's like down in this place and talking about how it's awful for our community and people won't find recovery and you're just enabling people to get high and, can't believe there's already been 5 overdoses. And that was one of the funny things about it is that's the headline from the particular news establishment that they get their information from. But the fact is, like you and I had talked about at that time when I told you about it, that's 5 people that didn't die that would have if they weren't there, possibly.
Right. And it's the same idea as like, syringe exchange. It's like giving people clean needles doesn't make them go out and shoot heroin. It's not like if we start handing clean needles out on Route 40 that people that never used heroin are going to go, oh yeah, this seems like the right idea at the time. And it's the same with a safe injection site. These people are not, people that are in chaotic use are not going to go, oh, well, there's no really safe place to use, so I think I'll just not use today, or I'll not use this amount. Like, they're going to use and do the same thing, whether you tell them it's okay or not. Like, they're not looking for your approval. But in fairness, I was one of those people for a long time. Probably the first 10 years of my recovery, if not longer, I was, medicated assisted treatment is legal drug use and it's terrible and it's not a good way to treat people and all this stuff is enabling and what the fuck. And it really took some soul searching on my part to be like, all right, so what is most important? Is it most important to me that the life choices that I've made and the way that I've chose to handle my addiction, that be quote unquote right and that be justified as the best way to do it? Or is it more important that people aren't suffering and dying as a result of this disease?
Right.
And, we can argue about qualities of life and some of that stuff. I get it. But if the choices are between dying and using street drugs or, using a medical grade drug in a safe environment, I think I'll take that over death,
Yeah. And David alluded to this point on the episode where we had him on to talk about his book, The Weight of Air, but I want to really entrench this point with you. So listen up, dear listener. If they gave out free drugs, free, government watched over and maybe processed or whatever, if they gave out free drugs at a location and they gave you clean needles and they would watch over you to make sure you didn't die. They say they set this up, right, in your hometown. Would your parents go there and start using? Would your spouse or your kids just automatically go there and start using? What about your closest friends? Would any of them decide that since the government is giving out free drugs and clean needles and a safe place to use them, that they now all just want to be heroin users? Would they do that? So if nobody you fucking know would actually make that decision, why do you think people are going to, like, do you think there's other people that you don't know that are going to randomly go start getting high?
Well, I will be honest. So and I'm a proponent of not just decriminalization, but legalization of drugs. But I am curious, like, we know that alcohol is one of the most easily accessible drugs. So we see a really high rate of alcohol use in minors and adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
And now with marijuana being more legally available, some of those rates have gone up. And I don't know that there's a correlation or not. I mean, I'm just curious, like, if we did make access to other drugs easy, would it introduce people at younger ages? I mean, I would hope not.
Well, I would imagine you would have to be 18 to go use them at these places.
Yeah, but it's like alcohol, you know? I mean, you're not supposed to have access to alcohol till you're 21, but I don't know about what world you lived in, but I never had much of a problem getting access to alcohol from 16 on. It was pretty easy.
Well,
you know?
and so in that vein, I actually say my idea limits how much people can get, because if you are given it on site and monitored and you have to use it on site, you can't take it with you anywhere. Well, now we don't have anywhere else to sell it. Like, people aren't going to buy it from the guy on the corner. So now there's no dealers that exist. Now there's no access for teenagers to get to it. Unlike alcohol, which is still out here freely in the world. And maybe we put alcohol in this. Hey, you can drink as much as you want. You just have to come to this site to do it.
Right.
Now all drugs are contained at this monitored site and nobody has access to them that's not supposed to. So now I think everything goes down from that view.
You just fixed it.
Fucking
God damn it. Why don't they call you?
Right?
Why
do they not call me?
So back to the safe injection site. So my understanding of how they work in general, this is a general rule because I've never actually been to one, but they provide booths or cubicles, or in some cases a little more private area that is monitored, in some cases by a medical person, or in some cases by other peers.
How do you get the private area? Do you got to be a VIP?
I don't know. I was wondering that too, because the one picture I looked at, it showed a couple of cubicles, and then it showed one corner with like those medical like screens around it, and you can see someone's feet underneath.
Is that for somebody who has to get naked to get high?
Yeah, or I'm like, why are they back there?
I'm only injecting in my penis.
Maybe it's, or where they have to inject is,
There was a girl in my neighborhood that stripped instantly every time she got high. Like, literally just got naked. Like, would stand on the street naked, like waving at people.
Or just because she was high?
I think because she was high. Like, every time she got high, that was just her initial reaction, was just take her clothes off. Like, tequila makes your clothes come off. Apparently heroin made her clothes come off.
Wow.
But I mean, maybe that's the thing. Like, maybe they need the private room for that individual that just...
Well, and I was curious, like, how do you monitor the people in the private room? Do you got to, like, holler at them? Yo, like, still awake over there? You can't be nodding out.
I think, I mean, the doctors poke their head in the private room. They don't wait for you. So you can probably still poke your head in.
But yeah, so anyway, you can go into one of these cubicles or one into these private areas if you get the private area, and you know, can use whatever drugs. And in those areas, they have safe syringes, you know, clean syringes, clean use implements. The one I heard, warm towels, because apparently warm towels help clean your skin, but they also help to raise the veins so that you can find the veins easier, which I found fascinating.
I found it fascinating that they said that, like, a lot of the people who came there were really loving the warm towels. I was like, okay, never thought about it, but yeah, cool, that's awesome.
I was thinking they're getting a facial.
Right.
I'm going to shoot up and then put my warm towel on my
Well,
face.
I keep picturing a strip club when you say the private rooms. I'm like, I'll take the bottle service, you know, slip the person a 20. Like, I'll just go in the back room today. Feeling spicy.
But it's a, you know, it's a clean, safe environment. where you can use the safe as possible, you know?
Well, and apparently the article said that like they have a living room type area where people kind of hang out or whatever, which is fascinating. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You get high, you don't want to leave, you got a nice couch, cool, that's awesome. But then you were telling me the piece about you can smoke crack there, and I'm picturing like, for lack of better terminology, like 8 crackheads, right, running around, peeking out windows. And that was how I used,
out,
right? Yeah, I'm like, is that safe? Like, we're all thinking we're killing each other, or even I've never used the meth, but I hear the crystal meth is like even worse with the paranoia,
the meth-induced psychosis.
Can you imagine the people like all up in there? Wondering what's going on, all thinking each other's out to get each other. It's like a game of fucking perverse Clue or something.
Yeah, I imagine, and I could be wrong, but I think you would need some pretty intense training to, I guess, after experience, you know, carry something through that. But phew, yeah.
Well, and that's one of the fascinating parts of this that blew my mind is there's 2 safe consumption sites in New York right now, and they operate differently because really this is all an experiment. We're just trying to figure this shit out. We're trying to throw spaghetti at a wall. Let's see what sticks.
Right, see what works best.
One is operated by medical professionals, and the other said was run by peers, and it made the distinction in the article I read, peers who actively use still.
Or, could be actively using. Yeah.
I was like, really? You got high-ass people watching over other high-ass people?
Well, I thought about that, and I thought, so immediately, I thought, you can't have high people watching somebody who's high. So I thought they probably have some stipulations around that. There's probably a program director or somebody that oversees, like,
can't use
just like any job. Like, you can drink at home, but you can't come to work drunk. You know what I mean? I would imagine that's maybe the case.
Let's hope.
I hope. But who knows? Maybe we got the high people watching the
I don't know.
Maybe they know what to look out for.
Right.
What bags you got this week?
I see better when my eyes are pinned.
Yeah. But yeah, so the big, I guess, or one of the big criticisms of some of these, obviously, besides the using part, is that you are, as we've sort of joked about, though, you are inviting a certain, for lack of a better word, element, a certain amount of chaos. I mean, it's called chaotic use. So you're inviting a certain amount of chaos, not just into that facility, because from what I understand, these don't just exist on their own. They're within other facilities that were already conducting like syringe exchange and some other services. So these were places that had experience and were already dealing with other addictive issues. But you are definitely inviting a chaotic element into your neighborhood, into the neighborhood where these things exist. And I can see how that could be a little scary, or that could be a little maybe not so great for the neighborhood.
Yeah, I can hear that argument. And I mean, I think some of the residents of the neighborhoods were, you know, frustrated that a lot of the people, so I guess they get information, like location information from the people who come to the sites, but a lot of the participants weren't necessarily from the immediate area, which I wonder if there's some kind of worry about people in the immediate area of like, oh, I can't go there because people will know and I live here, and that kind of idea. I don't, and again, this is me talking out the side of my mouth because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but I don't picture that these are being put into areas where this isn't already a problem. Like I get the feeling that, you know, generally if you go into a city, the recovery houses, the needle exchange or, you know, supply of safe use tools, they're in areas where they're needed. Like they're not just some randomly far off place where people don't have access to go get them. They're right there where people are on ground zero. So I get the feeling that this problem was already in their neighborhood. And, you know, some of the things I read, it's not just about keeping people alive, even though that is the main point. There's also like, we're keeping all this trash that should not be on the streets, whether that's drug paraphernalia, baggies, used tools that are dangerous for people to accidentally step on. Like all this is being contained in this one spot too. So I'm like, well, they're kind of cleaning up your neighborhood. Like, I get it, you're bitching about it, but...
And that's definitely the hope, you know, because, as you said, these, at least the two that exist now, were not in like neighborhoods that didn't already have a lot of problems with chaotic use and people actively using in the streets and things like that. And in our area, it's up towards, Kensington in Philadelphia is another area where it's pretty much an open drug use market already. You know what I mean? If you go up there and walk around, and from what I understand, that's how these neighborhoods were already before these sites existed. So the hope is that you'll bring some of that element off of the streets and more indoors into an enclosed area. In other countries, at least, they haven't seen an increase in crime rates in those areas, but they haven't seen a significant decrease either.
Right.
So there's not a lot of evidence that it will decrease crime. But like you said, if it keeps people who are actively using, indoors, if I have kids in that neighborhood, do I want them seeing people shooting up and nodding out in alleyways? I mean, is that something? And then how much can we do to clean up these neighborhoods by giving people a place to safely dispose? And some of that are ideas within these facilities that you can perpetuate. I know we tend to think, not me, but society tends to look at addicts as these degenerate, no good, horrible people. But when I was using, I still had ethics and morals. And a lot of what I did, went against those morals and stuff. But within clinics, if you can explain to people, hey, look, we want to be safe and we want to keep kids safe. And most people, whether they're using drugs or not, still feel like that's a really good idea. Most people aren't out trying to harm people. This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause.
That's tricky. I mean, I had very few morals and ethics towards the end there of my using, but I'm picturing like if it was convenient. I mean, if this was a place that was convenient to me and, I could easily access, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't I go get fresh stuff and turn in my old stuff? Like I didn't have it out to like, oh, I want to dirty up the street. Like that wasn't on my mind. It was just most of my choices were out of like what makes the most sense for me at this point. Thinking of bringing the crime into the neighborhood again. If we go back to just giving this shit away to people at the places, they have no reason to commit crime.
Yeah,
crime's all about getting money for drugs.
Yeah, because that was part of the argument against is that you're giving a place where people use. You're going to encourage dealers to be in those areas. I mean, It's just too easy.
Just give it out.
They don't have to travel. They're not going to travel.
Yeah. I'm looking at this. It says over the first 2 weeks, 43 overdoses were reversed. That's 43 people that we don't know if they would have definitely died. But chances are the good majority, if you're off in a place alone somewhere, not around anybody, and, nobody finds you, that's what we know happened. So in 2 weeks, 43 lives were saved, basically. I don't know. And I guess going back to this idea of the community pushback, like it's interesting that our communities, especially, this isn't, like I said, this isn't like, some fancy ritzy neighborhood where they've never had drug use problems around and we're just throwing this in there to mix it all up for them. Like this is an area that already struggled, but it's interesting that the pushback immediately is we got to get this place out of here. We got to shut it down. We got to get rid of it. Like that's the pushback to the idea in my head, right? That's not the pushback to the practice because you don't even know what's going to happen in the practice yet. You haven't given it time to see. I mean, these interviews with community people were 2 weeks in, right? So I guess just why don't we default to this other idea of like, okay, look, we're in the community. I have some reasonable concerns about this. Let me go talk to them. Let's have like an open forum with the community and the people who run the place, right? Let's have an open dialogue so that we can see how well it does work, what happens over time. Let's give it 6 months, see what changes do take effect. We can voice our concerns. We can voice things we see in the community, like, oh, look, I think you're helping, but I do see that this behavior has picked up or changed or adjusted, and we don't really like that in this community. And then maybe the center has the ability to like have ideas of what to do to try to curb that particular behavior, right? Like the pushback to the idea is like, you just need to get the fuck out of our neighborhood. But it's interesting that that's our default instead of defaulting to like, well, let's see what progress this brings, and then let's work with this location to see what else we can work on. Maybe they can adjust their practices a little bit that would take care of some of these issues that we find arise in the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a sentiment that's expressed in a lot of areas of life, I would say. I mean, you find the same thing with homeless shelters, with treatment centers. We've had it in this area with recovery housing, recovery houses wanting to open in certain neighborhoods. I mean, people will throw an uproar, you know what I mean? Well, this is my neighborhood. I don't want, these people in my neighborhood. It's fine if you do it somewhere else, just not here. And I mean, I don't know how you decide if not here, where, like, and that is a sentiment that we run into a lot with addiction services is everyone thinks we need them. Everyone thinks they're great, but no one wants them where the people are. And if you don't put them where the people are and they're not easily accessible, people won't typically go to them. I know I saw some research from the sites in Canada, and they said they really only found decreases or significant decreases in overdoses in a very limited radius to those safe use sites, and that outside of those areas, as you got a few miles outside of those areas, the overdose rates were still the same. So what that tells us is that people typically aren't going to travel for miles and miles to go to a safe use site. But as you said, if it's there and it's convenient and easily accessible, then they probably will. So does that mean we need dozens of them all over the city? I don't know.
Or if we gave out free drugs there, everybody would go 20 and 30 miles. Fuck yeah. I'd move states. I'd move countries. Like, Canada's giving out free drugs. I'm there. Fuck Baltimore. I don't want to be here anymore. Like, yeah, I feel like, either one of those works, I guess. I don't see my vision coming true in my lifetime, unfortunately. The difference between using Narcan on like an American versus a Canadian? No. So for the American, you Narcan them and they wake up and they're pissed off and they're angry that you fucked their high up and everything. And a Canadian wakes up and they're like, sorry. I just made that shit up. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely think we do default to this idea of like, yes, not in my neighborhood. And this is what it leads to. Elkton, a local community government city. I don't know what the fuck you call Elkton. Is it a city?
I guess
township.
You would call it a city.
Whatever. It's a local area around us. They were against having methadone clinics, so they created a whole new law for Elkton that you can't have certain, and they worded it in a way that could keep out methadone clinics without saying we're keeping out methadone clinics, right? And my mental health practice found the perfect little place that they wanted to buy that was within Elkton that had like, space to provide mental health services. And there was like room out back to take nice walks and participate in nature. And we could do some cool stuff there. And we couldn't get it because we're zoned as a medical facility. And that's how they worded it to keep the fucking methadone out. So now you've restricted access to mental health services that are, on the up and up because you have a shady fucking problem with methadone clinics that help people.
Right. And that's the same with, Voices of Hope and some of their services. Like, they've had to find a facility outside of town, the township or whatever you call it, the definition of the town limits. They could not have a facility within town limits. Most things are easy walking distance. They're on the bus line. They're easily accessible. It's where the most resources are. And yet you're going to take a resource and push them to the outer limits, so that now it makes them harder and less accessible. And
Good job, Elton.
Yeah, it like creates
played
barriers.
yourself.
Like those ideas create barriers, and that's as of right now, that's one of the biggest impediments. And like we're in a rural area. This isn't a city where
Right.
it's easy to get around. And I mean, granted, like in this case, Voices isn't too far from town. It's within walking distance on a decent day. When it's cold, it's a little bit of a hike. But to get a little further out to some of the recovery housing or where, the women's house, is a few miles out, do we really want people walking miles to get access to services, up major roadways? It's, you just create these barriers by having these weird laws. Or
I got to be honest though, the women that are new in recovery in the women's recovery house, they're not going to walk. Somebody's going to pick them up. I'm just saying. Somebody will give them a ride. No, that's very sexist of me. But unfortunately, probably true more often than it's not. Yeah, I think Elkton fucked themselves out of, having services because they're, I don't know what you want to call it. It's not racist. Like, because they're offended by the idea. They think people who struggle with substance misuse are bad and they want to get rid of them. Their take on that has caused them to miss out on other services that they would probably love to have in their town, like mental health services. And I just, you fuck yourself when you try to, get around all this in a shady way of like, well, we can't say we don't want methadone in our town. We'll just say we don't have more medical facilities. That's it. We'll fix it that way. And well,
yeah, and
I lose out.
I mean, I can't say that it's not somewhat true. It's like when you provide services, the people that need those services are going to come, and so if you, let's say a homeless shelter, when you start providing homeless services, you're going to get people come to your area that need access to those homeless services. And there's a trade-off. I mean, do you only serve the people that are from your local community, or do you become a haven for people? I don't know. I guess it depends on what side of your humanitarian ledger, where that is. And I don't know.
If you gave out free drugs, people would never fucking leave and you wouldn't have to worry about it. You would just have a warehouse somewhere and you would never see it. They wouldn't want to leave. They don't need to be on a bus line. Fuck, they need to go. I got my drugs. I'm here. I don't know. Maybe that's a shitty way to say it, but when I was using, if you'd have had a facility that gave me free, I wasn't going nowhere else.
Yeah, it's probably true.
Why would I need to? For what? What do they got? Food? Who needs that shit?
Well, and from what I understand, that's what typically used to happen before this, like, war on drugs and the illegal. Like, you used to be able to go to a doctor and they would prescribe you heroin or morphine at the time, and you would just go to the doctor and you'd get your morphine and they'd shoot you up while you were there, and then you'd leave. And some people had like twice a day, I think it was, from some of the things that I've read. It's like, and there were programs like you were on a morphine program and you came in the morning and you came at night and you got your shot, and then you went off and did what you did. Hopefully, I mean, the idea was that you could just go out and go to work or do whatever you needed to do, but that was considered a medical condition and they were treating you medically for that condition.
Where's Jenny? I'm having nostalgia for a time I didn't even participate in.
The good old days.
Right, the good old days. When you could just get high and nobody bothered
Maybe
you.
that's what people mean by the good old days. They were getting morphine at the doctor. They didn't give a shit about politics.
Definitely what they mean.
Right.
So, one of the things I found interesting, they don't even necessarily revive people with naloxone all the time.
Yeah.
This isn't just Narcan. They're generally, it said, more often than not, using a simple oxygen tank, because if you catch an overdose early on, that's all it takes to reverse the course of it. And that is wild to me. And then they said when they do use naloxone, they're microdosing it. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Wow. All these concepts I feel like we don't know anything about. And
That's just another great benefit to the addict. Like, because if you don't know, when you use naloxone on people, it brings them out of their overdose, but it also eliminates their high as well. It blocks your opioid receptors. So you quickly lose your high, so I've heard stories, and I'm sure they're true. I've never done it, but that people have brought someone out of an overdose, and then the people coming out of the overdose are pissed off and angry because you just ruined their high.
Unless you're Canadian.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, I guess so. If you have a trained, prompt medical response to these things, you can do it in a safe manner with just oxygen. I mean, not only that, but you're not injecting a drug into somebody's body, which to me, if you can do anything without injecting drugs into people, it's always better.
Right, right. There is a drawback. It says right here, visitors have to bring their own drugs. So that's the downside of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would be much nicer if they didn't.
But it's also the elimination of, the impact of these overdoses on our medical facilities, the spread of diseases, the reduction of the spread of infectious diseases in our community. Like there's some of those things that will be interesting to see, what happens. Are we reducing some of our demand on our medical staff, which right now with COVID we hear is a huge problem?
Yeah. It would be nice. And that's another piece of it, right? When you talk about people who don't give a shit about people who are shooting drugs, okay, that's fine. You don't give a shit, but maybe your neighborhood's cleaner because some of the, trash or leftover medical waste from people using is left at this facility instead of on your streets, which that's always a plus. And you're saving taxpayer money. They're not calling the ambulance for these overdoses, right? They don't have to. They're right there. They're on the scene. They're doing it themselves. Like, where's the drawback to that saving money? Because I don't know. How much is an ambulance now? $800, $1,000 for ambulance ride?
And you can bet the homeless person is not paying for that ambulance ride.
Correct.
We are through our insurance and through these other things.
Right. So, I mean, that's a draw. It said the Biden administration, again, because this is still federally illegal, the Biden administration hasn't really given any idea of where they're going to stand on it. Like literally the federal government could step in and shut this down whenever they want. They haven't, but they also haven't really been like, hey, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. We're on board. We're not going to come shut it down. So they haven't really taken a stance at all. And maybe that's something we could, if we believe that this might be a good idea, press whoever, whether it's Biden or the next administration, like, let's have a stance on this. Let's be okay with it. Let's try.
Yeah, we would need a change in legislation to make it, quote unquote legal. There was supposed to be a safe use site in Philadelphia that actually got held up specifically because of that federal law. That's actually what I think it was supposed to open back in, I want to say October. It was actually supposed to open before the New York ones did, but then it was legally challenged and it's still being argued in court to whether they can, legally operate.
Right. And I think, even if you don't change the legislation, even if you just give the public stance, hey, look, this is not something we're interested in going after or prosecuting right now,
Yeah, wasn't that with marijuana right now? Isn't marijuana still federally a crime? They still have not changed that?
Right. But their stance is, public, that we're just not doing anything. We're letting other people figure that out right now. And I ran into this looking at, going to a nude beach one time. It was like, that was in the description. It's like, look, this is illegal technically in the county, but federally it's on federal property. So there's no federal stipulation against it. And they've publicly said we have better things to do than lock up naked people. Like, so it's on record and it makes people feel safer about using that environment. Like, okay, look, we know where this space is. We know they're not going to come do anything, so we can, feel free to participate and enjoy it in how we see fit.
I mean, the scary part of that, though, is that the federal government can change their mind in any administration, or even in this administration, they can change their mind and go, no, we think it's terrible, we're shutting them down. And all of a sudden, this thing can be closed. And when you're trying to operate or run some of those facilities, there's not this abundance of money that people are handing you to open safe use sites. It's probably difficult to get funding and to have continued funding for long-term success. But when you also have the fear that at any moment someone can step in and shut you down, like it's really difficult. A lot of people go into this work and just be like, hey, we're just going to push now, do the best we can, and we'll see what happens. And they're courageous people, but what you lose in that is people that, I don't want to say that aren't courageous, but I mean, not everyone can
scaredy
operate
cats.
in that world. If you have a family and kids and you're trying to invest in a career and you have some sort of medical training or ability, you might have a lot of compassion for people with addiction issues, but you're like, that's pretty risky.
Well,
That's a
shady.
risky endeavor to get into when I don't know if, at our next president, they might decide these places can't exist and you're going to shut them down. So, if, we could change some legislations and hopefully attract more better, brighter minds to this field to help solve this, addiction issue.
Yeah, so the U.S. Representative Nicole Malliotakis is, I think, how you say her name, represents parts of South Brooklyn and Staten Island and has introduced a bill in Congress that would prohibit organizations that have overdose prevention centers, a part of them, from receiving any federal funding, including for unrelated services. And has publicly said, I'm opposed to the heroin injection sites because I believe it is only encouraging and enabling people who have this addiction and is not actually doing anything to help them. Is it encouraging and enabling to people, do you think?
I mean, I guess that's more of a personal decision, but that it's not actually helping them, I think, is pretty incorrect. I think that's almost factually incorrect because we do know that more people engage with treatment options through needle exchange. We don't know about safe use sites because that's new, but we know through needle exchange that more people access treatment through those than any other public service that's out there. So I can't imagine a safe use site where they're also providing these wouldn't, because most of these sites, it's not like they just open a place and say, here, come use drugs. They have, addiction counseling there. They have resources. They have therapies, things like that. And I mean, I don't think they're meant to encourage people to use drugs. They're meant to give them a safe place and encourage them to be safe and smart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and somebody made a point, if you're not at this location, where are you? You're in the IHOP bathroom?
Right.
You're in, KFC's restroom? You're going to be somewhere doing this. You're not going to, be nowhere. You're not going to disappear because the site goes away. And that's what when it says encouraging and enabling, again, I don't know anybody in my life that would necessarily go out and start a new way of life of heroin use or drug use just because some place opened that allowed it or accepted it. These are people who are going to be doing it somewhere. And so it's just kind of giving them a communal space to do it safely and maybe not detract so much from the community surrounding it.
Yeah, and it's the I guess I'm going to call it old school idea that shaming people and ridiculing and moralizing people is somehow going to make them want to change. And in fact, I think, at least in my case, it served the opposite effect. I already felt shamed and embarrassed and full of self-hate, and just piling more of that on did not make me want to change. It made me want to use even more
to cover up all that shame.
Right.
Yeah.
You're trying to get away from those feelings. And the idea of, a lot of these harm reduction methods is that we're meeting people where they are and telling them, hey, this is where you are, but you still matter. You're still a human being that deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. You're still a person that is loved, and we care about your health and safety, even if you don't. Even if you're not that caring about yourself, we care about you, and we'll keep you alive, and we'll keep you safe.
Yeah, I think all the things you're talking about just serve to further alienate me, not only from the community at large around me, but alienate me from even the belief that there was hope for me, right? All these ideas of how terrible I was and the ways people acted towards people who had, drug misuse issues, substance problems. It was that just means that there's no hope for me. I'm so separate from these kind of people that it would probably be best if I just die. That's probably the best option because ain't nothing else coming from this.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I felt about myself at the end. The best I could do for most of the people in my life was to die. My life wasn't really worth it.
Right. At least that would bring them the relief of not having to worry about it anymore. And thank God that didn't happen.
Yeah. And I think we're becoming more aware of how sort of intertwined, mental health issues are in addiction, how, much addiction now we're coming to learn is born out of trauma, and these are all things that with the right treatments can be addressed. If we can just get people connected to the right resources, connected to the whether it's medical or, therapeutic or whatever, needs they have, if we can just connect them to those right resources, they can find the avenue to address why they're in this place.
Right. Anything else you wanted to point out about the safe use site? Safe consumption site?
No, I think it's, fascinating to watch. I am grateful for myself that I don't have to frequent one today. I have thought that if they open one in this area, like, would I want to work there as a person in recovery? I don't know. That might be hard. I would like to think I would, but I'm not so sure. It's tough. I mean, but I guess my only message would be, if you're a person in recovery, try to approach it less from a judgmental point of view and more from a humanitarian point of view. And just because I'm a person in recovery, I still look at active users are my same brothers and sisters as recovering people in a meeting. Like, there's no difference. We're all just in different places with our struggle at the moment. But, people that are using aren't any different than me. They're my brothers and sisters too. And I want them to be safe and loved and, healthy and not die.
Yeah, all those things. And I would say, for me, if you listen to this and you have a beef with, safe use sites, like, let us know. I'm curious. What is your beef? What is your issue? What do you think might happen, right? Because I want to hear the arguments. I want to explore it more. I want to see if maybe there is something I haven't thought of that makes these less beneficial than more beneficial. But let us know about that. And I don't know, man. I just, it's hard for me to see the drawback, I guess, for me right now. I think they're useful. I don't think they're making people turn to a life of drugs that wouldn't already be there anyway. I think we're just helping people stay alive.
Yeah. And I guess I think, even if it's enabling, like, aren't the benefits worth the enabling? Like, I mean, to me, it seems like they are, but I don't know.
Free drugs for all. All right. Go out. Have a safe week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.